following a visit to the site, the record form was amended to then read east and west elevations of modern additions to the south, projecting bays of echo colour and detailing of the 19th and early 20th century additions. So that was the first time that those later additions to Ivy Hall got mentioned specifically on the record form. Now, I've got a bit of background there in paragraphs 11 onwards, and I've talked about the original architects and so on. I've talked about how Ivy Hall was extended on various occasions. And the earlier additions were done by architects who really followed on from the original building. They respected the original architect's style, if you like. And then later on in the 1980s and 1990s, a major redevelopment of the building took place. First of all, the old building was completely gutted, with the exception of the three facades, the northeast and west facades. The inner courtyard disappeared, all the internal parts of that building disappeared, and basically the area behind the facades was kind of filled in, if you like. So really the only part of that building that's really got any historic value is those three facades. Then there was another phase between 1991 and 92. We believe the architects for that part of the building were in fact Vile and Bellamy, not Tringrove and Blunt, as is stated in the record form. So they did a completely different style of the building, and it's been described as postmodern. On paragraphs 15 and onwards, I'll talk a little bit about the original style of that building, the Jacobsian style. It was an earlier 20th century style of the 17th century, and I've outlined some of the characteristics of that style there. But then I went on to say in paragraph 18 that the style never really found favour in New Zealand. It was a bit of an oddity, if you like. It just really never found favour. On paragraphs 20 onwards, I talk about later architectural styles, beginning with sort of modernism and so on. Paragraph 21, I talk about the birth of postmodernism, if you like, and as I said, at the best, the postmodern architecture was kind of whimsical and was fun, but at the worst, it was a bad joke, if you like, and confused and sometimes ridiculous. And I've given some examples there of some postmodern buildings, which are pretty odd. Yeah. So that's postmodernism. And on Ivy Hall, Vile and Bellamy, they tried to reflect the original building, but it kind of didn't really come off, if you like. There's some references there, but it was a bit of a strange style. It was really not one thing or the other. I've said in paragraph 24, those additions are really a product of their time. Now, I've sort of suggested it sort of tries too hard to be respectful, but it kind of falls over a bit, really. In paragraph 25 through to 27, I talk about various approaches to adding onto buildings. The first one is replication, which we don't really favour because you can't really tell the difference between the original building and the additions. Other ways of adding on to buildings there. I'll talk about complementary additions, differential contrasts, and so on. So there's various ways that you can add on to a heritage building. And I've said in paragraph 27, the 1990s additions, they fall somewhere between some of those other approaches. There is a definition between the older parts and the newer parts. But in some ways, the additions are too similar, and in other ways, they're kind of not close enough. So, really not one thing or the other. And in my opinion, I've said in paragraph 29, so the additions, I believe that they are unresolved, a lot of those additions, and there's some very awkward things going on there. And I've said at the top, at the end of paragraph 29, I believe that these additions should be accepted for what they are, a rather timid solution of its time. which attempted to provide contemporary additions to Ivy Hall, influenced by current architectural trends. And as a result, I think they lack sufficient merit to be included as part of the scheduled heritage item. In paragraph 33, I've addressed some of the requirements of the Canterbury Regional Policy Statement. And there's a particular objective there, and I've underlined part of it. I'll read it out. The identification and protection of significant heritage items, places and areas, and their particular values that contribute to Canterbury's distinctive character and sense of identity. And I've said, in my opinion, postmodernism does not, this is paragraph 35, postmodernism does not fit that definition, as it was never an architectural style that found favour in New Zealand. And I don't believe that it contributes to Canterbury's distinctive character and identity. On paragraph 38, in the record form, it states the redevelopment of the building by Trenggrave and Blunt in the 1980s is notable as an example of facadism, combined with a postmodern interpretation of the building's Jacobian revival architecture. And I'll say in paragraph 39, notable as an example of facadism, but there's nothing really notable about facadism. It sort of goes against all the what if you like, all the reputable ways of extending a heritage building. I've said there are examples in New Zealand, particularly in Christchurch after the earthquakes, but it's definitely not something that's notable. And in paragraph 40, I've again looked at the postmodernism. And the record form says it's a postmodern interpretation of the building's Jacobian revival architecture. And then in paragraph 41, I've referred to the criteria in section HH shed 1 of the proposed district plan. I've said, in my opinion, in this case, there was no critical analysis or even discussion of the merits or otherwise of the architectural aesthetic value of the additions and whether they contribute or detract from the overall heritage values of the place. So there's, as I said, there's been no critical analysis. It's just stated that the building is postmodern. That's all it's stated. It doesn't say that it's good or bad or what its contribution is to the heritage values of that building. And I've said for these reasons alone, I do not believe that the later additions should be included as part of the heritage item. And in paragraph 42, Dr. McPherson says that just as some of the earlier architects like J.S. Guthrie and Cecil Wood interpreted the original Strauss design, so did Trenggrove and Blunt. I suggest they were very different situations. As I said at the beginning, Guthrie and Wood, they were very careful to follow the original design. And I've sort of got an example there. The Christchurch Centre was exactly the same. That's sort of quite different to the later editions, particularly the Violet Melody postmodern editions. And I don't believe that they do harmoniously integrate with the original design. I'll see in paragraph 44, by contrast, the later editions deviate substantially from the original design. And it's very different, as I said, from the harmonious integration. On page 49 is a bit of a conclusion there. Sorry, paragraph 49, I suggest the 1990s editions was simply a product of their time, the result of what was no more than a passing phase in world architecture, soon to be forgotten. And on that basis, I do not believe that the listing for Ivy Hall should include those later editions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pearson. We'll just see if we have any questions. I'll just start to my left. No questions. Go down to the far side. Councillor Nicole, questions? No. Andrew?
Yeah, I wanted to. Thank you, Mr. Pearson. I have to say it would have been helpful, and I don't know if you've got it now, but would have been helpful if there'd been some photographs of these extensions that you're describing, or in a map showing where they were, for us just to actually eyeball them and have a look to try and read your comments, you read your evidence against the picture to try and understand what you were saying. I found that quite challenging. Do you actually have any photographs of these areas that you can provide?
I do have photographs of some of these areas. Yes, I do.
Sure.
And I can certainly send those through.
Because we do have to do a site visit anyway, and so I mean, I think I did struggle to read what you were saying without being able to see what you were talking about. So,
I understand that.
yeah,
Yes.
that's right. So, I mean, one question. So, paragraph 30, you talk about postmodern additions and lack sufficient. Is it? I believe the postmodern additions lack sufficient merit for them to be included as part of the scheduled heritage item. And then you state that I know of no other postmodern building that has been scheduled as historic heritage place and district plan, and I suggest that there is a good reason for that. So what is the reason?
What is the reason?
Yes.
But it's just that it was a very short-lived phase, postmodernism. As I said, I think there was a good reason that these buildings are not. Well, there's relatively few buildings in what you might call a postmodernism style in New Zealand. There's very few of them. Probably the ones, Wellington I do mention in my evidence, the Wellington Public Library by in Field, which I personally like. I think it's a good building. It's kind of whimsical, if you like. With the ferns, the metal ferns and so on, it's kind of whimsical. There's another building, I'm not quite sure what part of Wellington it's in, but it's definitely postmodernism. It's got some quite overscale capitals and columns, again, in Field. But really, it really was a passing phase. It was something that was kind of quickly dismissed, if you like. And it got rather silly, and I'll give you some examples of postmodern buildings on just following page, paragraph 21. So it really got a bit ridiculous, and I don't think anybody really took it seriously. So I think that's part of the reason why. Well, part of the reason is there are very few postmodernism buildings in New Zealand, as I said, and because they're not particularly good architecture, I guess I would say. I don't know what else I can say really, but just those reasons alone, I think. It was just a passing fad.
Okay. Thank you. It wasn't clear from your paragraphs as to what those good reasons were. So just as a follow up, then, I mean, if there aren't many listed and there aren't few, and it was over a short period of time, is there not merit in that regard for identifying and understanding, I guess, the architectural merit from that phase? Because isn't that over time or in the future, in 50 years' time, won't that be of significance? Can you just explain to me why that won't occur?
Yeah, so it's a little bit hard here, but I think I got the gist of it anyway. You sort of said, is there a reason for scheduling this particular part of the building? Because it was just it was, I guess, a phase, if you like, in New Zealand architecture. That was the question.
Yeah, and also it's unusual by your own view. A short phase and unusual phase.
Right.
Can you just comment on whether there's merit in that from that perspective? Yeah,
I think, well, part of the problem was, as I've said in my evidence, there was no critical analysis of the merits or otherwise of the additions and of the contribution that they might make or may not make to the building. There was no analysis done. It was just sort of stated that the postmodern additions were then included on the record form without that critical analysis. And I think that's really important. It's part of the requirement for scheduling buildings within the proposed district plan that it does meet certain criteria. But that analysis hasn't been done. I think also that, as I've said before, postmodernism, it can have merits. The Wellington Public Library, I gave an example of, I believe it has merits. I think it's quite a good building, it's whimsical and so on. Whereas this one, it's kind of, it tries to reflect the original building, but it comes across as a bit of a cheap imitation, if you like. Like there's certain gabled forms built in precast concrete, so it's how would you say, so it comes across as a bit of a budget version of the original, I suppose. I don't think it's particularly good. I think there are some really awkward things happening on those buildings. The junctions of the gable ends with the buildings behind them. There's a glass insert there, which again, it's an awkward junction. Of the various ways of adding onto a building, I personally think that a modern building, like a really modern way of adding onto a building, is sometimes can be the right way of doing it, where there's no mistaking what's new and what's old. And I think in New Zealand, but somebody actually compared with some of the overseas examples you see, and some are pretty way up, but there are some really good examples of modern additions to buildings. I don't think this one falls into that category.
Thank you. I'm just following on from that. And so you've criticised, I think, in your view, the lack of critical analysis of the building and its merits for these extensions for listing. So just for clarity for me then, so your assessment that you've explained to us and provided in evidence is that of a level of detail in your mind, because I understand you have done assessments of heritage buildings. Is your assessment that you provided to us in your evidence of a sufficient level of detail that you would expect the council to have done, or have you done a lesser job than that, just in response to the council on this matter?
Really, just in response, like if I was doing it, I would do it in a lot more detail. I would, yes.
Okay. Right. Thank you for that. No further question.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to ask you a question, Mr. Pearson. Paragraph 33 is where you address the CRPS, the Regional Policy Statement, and you've underlined some words there, which talks about contributing to Canterbury's distinctive character and sense of identity. I was going to ask you, what do you understand would be Canterbury's distinctive character and sense of identity? Is that something that can be encapsulated, or is it a collection of styles and heritage items and ages of buildings? Is there any one distinctive character about Canterbury's sense of identity, do you think? Or is that more of a generic term?
Look, I do definitely. I did talk about a little bit in my paragraphs 15, basic 15. I'll talk about Gothic revival, and obviously Canterbury has got a lot of Gothic revival buildings in it. Arts and crafts was quite a strong part of Christchurch architecture, and you get buildings like the older, some of the buildings in the centre of Christchurch. Not the Provincial Council building was one other, which I should know. So yes, arts and crafts, Gothic revival, classical, there was a lot of classical.
So Lincoln University, the buildings there, the buildings clearly a part of that, aren't they? And so what?
I'm sorry, I just lost the video there.
Oh, sorry. So the Lincoln University and the listed buildings there are clearly part of that character, aren't they? And, for good reason. And so the analysis here is the additions, the 1990s additions, and what impact they have on that, and secondly, whether they warrant listing in their own right. And I think, if I understand your evidence, that that they don't warrant listing, because we already have that encapsulated in the buildings that are there. Essentially, that they form that basis, don't they? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the Jacobian style of the original part of that building is a bit unusual in New Zealand. As I've said in my evidence, there's very few Jacobian buildings around. And yeah, look, absolutely, I think those do make a contribution. I think they are part of our history. I think I've listed about 4 Jacobian buildings that I know of in New Zealand, one of which has been demolished, but Nelson Provincial building. But yeah, so look, absolutely, I think it wasn't a style that found particular favour in New Zealand. As I said, there's very few Jacobian buildings, but yeah, look, I absolutely accept that is part of Canterbury's character. Yeah, well, yes, but the additions, they don't, to me, they don't make the grade. Yes, yeah, we can say that it's not a particularly good example, I don't think, of postmodernism. That in some ways too close to the original, but in other ways that they're not close enough. So then kind of not one thing or the other. And for those reasons, yeah, I don't believe that, I do not believe they should be included as part of the heritage item.
No, look, that's, I think we understand that. So thank you very much for answering our questions. We look forward to going to visit and view these additions this afternoon. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you.
Over to you now.
Thank you, and good morning all. I mean, I'd like to start initially by saying that I'm supportive overall of the approach taken to the heritage chapter. I think it balances the protection and use of heritage items against the practical realities of maintaining, using, and of course keeping them. This is clearly reflected in the objectives and policies, the rule framework, and the matters of control and discretion. But in saying that, there's two items that are outstanding on the university submission, which I've given evidence on. So one was what Mr. Pearson was just talking about, the 1990s addition to the Ivy Hall. The second is landscaping works within a heritage setting, which is Rule 4. So turning first, I guess, to the Ivy Hall listing, 1990s edition, inclusion in the heritage listing. I mean, from my perspective, it's a planning question, which relies on a weighting of evidence between Dr. McKeown's assessment and Mr. Pearson's assessment. And I've reviewed both those against sort of the higher order documents, part 2 of the RMA, of course, going down to the regional policy statement, chapter 13. And I've also looked at schedule 1 of the proposed plan, which sets out the criteria for assessing and inclusion of heritage items. In my assessment, I sort of following off what Mr. Pearson has said, I think the analysis undertaken for the inclusion of the 1990s edition doesn't warrant its inclusion, and Mr. Pearson's statement is much more thorough analysis, which I think is the measure for assessment against those higher order documents. So if we look at the regional policy statement, for instance, it talks about the significant heritage values of an item. And then, as you just pointed out, that the policy which talks about does it contribute to Canterbury's distinctive character and sense of identity? And the answer I draw is no, it doesn't. And I guess if the panel was to accept that position, I think the second part of that is to include a plan in the heritage record form, which delineates those parts of the building which are protected and those that aren't. I have some experience with that in other parts of the district. I think I've touched on that in my evidence. It makes it a lot clearer going forward when you're looking at the rules in the plan and when the council officer is looking at the rules in the plan, which parts are protected and which rules apply to each part of the building.
I'll just ask you a question on that now, if I can. Sorry,
Yes,
just to break your flow, but I was interested in what you mean by that. Do you mean that I understand delineating the part of the building that's listed, but are you saying that that would naturally exclude the additions because you're seeking to have those removed?
So would exclude the addition.
So this is part of the relief, that you don't want that the additions listed, therefore you draw a line around everything other than the additions, basically. So that's basically what you're saying.
That's right.
All right, carry on. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, certainly. So that's that part of the submission and my evidence. And the second matter is landscaping works in the setting. I think myself and Mr. McTiernan are sort of on the same page, but I just think it needs to be clearer in rule for that some landscaping works are permitted within a heritage setting. Otherwise, you're reliant on the disturbance permitted standard, which I think is more aligned to infrastructure, because you're not changing the ground levels, you're putting in services, etc., to a building. And then I know Mr. McTiernan says that earthworks exclude landscaping works, but it still doesn't mean they're itemised in the permitted activity standards. So I think the additions we're seeking, which I've drafted, make that a lot clearer. I think that's only 2 points. So, do you have any questions?
Thank you. Just see if we have any questions. Well, you again, Andrew.
Thank you for your evidence, Mr. Osborne. It's just a point of clarification, really. So paragraph 49, you talk about unnecessarily listing the 1990s editions may impede the ability of the university to meet and provide for social and cultural needs by placing justified high threshold and future resource consent applications for redevelopment. And I just wondering, are there any plans for the university to develop there? I mean, is this a theoretical constraint or an actual constraint? Do you know?
It's theoretical as far as the Ivy Hall
Yes.
editions go. Yes.
Right. Yeah, okay. Thank you for clarifying. And also, and just as a comment, really, thank you for your working through the Section 42A report in the relation to landscaping and earthworks. I appreciate that, and it was helpful for you to clarify the university submission and why you think landscaping still needs to be covered. Thank you for that. Yes.
Thank you. And just to clarify, what are the additions actually used for at present?
They're part of the library, actually.
Part of the library. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Yes, I can ask about that. And just from a sort of a planning question, I guess, I did ask Mr. Pearson about the CRPS, and we talked about the distinctive character of Canterbury. And the way to determine that through that's the regional policy level is down through the district plan, and there are a series of criteria which you've drawn to our attention for considering listing of buildings, and there's quite a series of those. From a planning point of view, if you go through an assessment of those, does that sort of flow back up into the CRPS description of what might be deemed as character of Canterbury as a whole, so that you go through that exercise of assessing it through those criteria? Do you agree that's the way to approach it?
I think that's correct.
Yes.
As far as historic heritage goes, yes.
Right. And what's your understanding of those criteria? Is it necessary to meet all of them, or one of them, or some of them?
Some of them. I mean,
Just some of them.
There's a requirement to be all of them. No, it's not.
Okay, because we have, I think Dr. Pearce, Mr. Pearson rather, said that only one sort of criteria had been assessed. But that's why I was interested to know whether it's necessary to assess more than one.
I don't think it is. No, I think you can make a weighting, but it would need to be a pretty strong basis for one criteria to be met to have it included. Also, I think that, the explanation of the policies in the RPS go beyond that too. They do give further leeway for the council to include other items which don't meet those criteria necessarily. But I think for that to happen, it would need to be a pretty unique and special item past that threshold.
Thank you for that. And yes, you got a follow up on that? Okay, fine. And thank you for that. And just on the landscaping one at the end, do you know if the district plan has a definition of landscaping as such? I'd be surprised if it did, but you're basically suggesting a definition by default through this rule, aren't you?
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't? Okay. No. All right. So we'll be interested to know the reporting officer's response to that, to that suggestion, either now or in a written reply at the end. So we'll come back to that. Have time to consider that. Thank you. I think we have no other questions. As I said, Yes, that's right. Yeah, we are going out to the site, and we don't have any photographs or plans of these additions. So I was going to, basically say we wish to go to the site and have a look at that. And is that easily arranged? Can we just go to the site? And I'm assuming that the officers know where that is because they've been on a site inspection.
So that's fine. Yes, I can alert the university, but just walking there and
just walking
the site is fine. That's
all right. Okay. Yep. Thank you. And that is the case. You've done a site visit, both of you, and you'll be able to assist the person who's taking us on the site visit as to where we're going. Thank you. Very good. Okay. Thanks for that. All right. Look, we have no further questions, but thank you for the time and effort you've put into preparing that statement, and we'll consider it in due course.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome to come ahead, Ms. Aston, and set yourself up when you're ready. Thank you. Oh, you've read, oh,
Yeah.
that's fine. Well, just organised, yeah, thank you. Right, so you're going to start with Miss McPherson, is that right? Are you going to start with Miss McPherson? Yep, up to you. However you wish to play it.
Yes.
Okay.
I think it might be better to start with me because I've seen all the general sort of set the overview and then we go on to detail the issues that
Yes.
the heritage status has resulted in for consent development.
That makes sense. Yes, indeed. So yes, I'd just like to welcome the Lilly Family Trust representatives, and we have read the statements of evidence that have been filed. Thank you for doing that, and we'll hand over to you now to present that to us however you wish. We will have some questions.
Just also, I've got Mr. Russell Lilly here with me. He's obviously very knowledgeable about the building and its history and what's happening with the context of the site. And he's certainly able to answer any questions, any clarification that you might have. Yeah. So just summarising my evidence first. I guess I've summarised at section 12 the principal reasons why the trust opposes the listing. Basically, there have been substantial alterations and additions over the years which have substantially compromised the building's authenticity. And in particular, it's not just the building, it's also the setting which has been listed. And the setting is to the rear of the building, and that's completely, none of that is original, the rear of the building where the car park is and that's the area that the public see. The frontage of the building is very, very close to the State Highway, and you would only whiz past it. So the alternative that in the circumstances is put forward as a more sensible alternative is to have a suitable plaque and interpretation board, because we acknowledge that it is part of the heritage of Rolleston. And or on this site if it was at any stage redeveloped. And just by way of context, that there was a stick of compliance for demolition held for the hotel or the Rowley Inn, but there's now no immediate plans to. development concept, which incorporated the Z development on the site of the rolling in.
So if I may, so that confirms that the hotel was not actually listed in the operative plan?
No, it wasn't.
It wasn't, okay.
Yeah, this is a new listing.
Yeah. All right,
Yeah.
thank you.
So I guess, yeah, in that context, I personally feel that the whole Section 32 assessment really is, and in my mind, is quite not adequate for fit for purpose. Before I talk about that, just quickly in terms of the heritage policy, piece 6 talks about the site setting, and any new use and development has to contribute to the long-term viability, retention, or ongoing use of the heritage item, which is a pretty high bar. And it's very difficult, for example, for Z to establish that. And this is a very strategic location where we can anticipate further commercial development will occur. Yeah, so Z will talk about that in more detail. In terms of the cost-benefit analysis, the policies for demolition have got an avoid component to them, so again, it's very challenging. Be avoided, and a huge amount of cost, time, and uncertainty would go into establishing those criteria are met. Likely to require specialist heritage design and economic expertise as a minimum. Mr. Lilly has looked into the possibility of any kind of grants to help, because there is work to be done to this building, and a few $1,000s as a maximum is what he's been told. It's really, in the total scheme of things, there's no help at all, really, to be honest. So in terms of the cost benefit analysis, I guess the point is that it really hasn't drilled down into the costs and benefits for protecting particular items, which it should have done. This is like a designation. It's something new that doesn't exist at the moment. And really the onus is on the council to actually, that the work has been all about what is the heritage value of the building, and nothing about the economic and social costs and benefits to the owner. So my conclusion is that there really isn't. See the site, and then you understand what I'm saying. Yeah.
Presentation, because as I said, we have read your statement, and we will have some questions, so thank you for doing that. Yeah, look, I'll again hand over to the panel members to ask any questions. Yvette.
Kia ora. Just in points of clarification, in terms of, the occupancy and the intent of moving forward. So before you applied for your consent, I've just heard that, that the hotel was not listed, and in Georgina's evidence, it was saying that then once it was listed, then a lot of the additional consents then came on board. Is that correct in some of the, those additional consents to be able to take the hotel into the future?
So by way of background, originally Russell's been working with Z for quite a while now in terms of that development. The original proposal was for Z to be on the corner on the site of the hotel, and so they were free to progress, and Russell was going to do a smaller commercial development on this part of the site, which now is where the Z station is going to go. There was a change in the concept to do with other reasons, nothing to do with the heritage listing. Has evolved, and now the proposal is for on the part of the site which doesn't contain the hotel. So, and this has all taken a while, and in the meantime, the plan's been notified. I think the Z consent was granted about the time of notification of the proposed plan, so I don't think it affected the main consent that's already been granted, but Georgina can confirm that. But what Z wants to do now is put a sign on the corner, which is quite a substantial sign, and the reasons for that are well explained and will be explained by Georgina. And they're caught by the fact that they're part of the heritage setting of the site, so that's why there's additional expenses. But what we're looking also is going forward, and if Russell wants to do anything else with the site, he'll have a very steep, hard, uphill, expensive situation to contend with. It'd be very challenging for him if he wanted to demolish at any stage, or even if he wanted to do anything within the confines of the site, do any alterations, additions. It just makes it'll be very challenging for him, and very, very expensive. And I think we feel that the actual inn doesn't justify that. And from I think that's the point. I mean, it's not a grade 1 national listed building, and there are ongoing significant costs in trying to maintain it as a heritage building if it's listed.
And given
Yes,
that,
Russell would like to add. Yeah.
Really, you said about the costs and that going forward to keep it to what it is. That's one of our biggest problems with an old building. To run it as a tavern, it's not a hotel, it's actually a tavern, it has been a tavern 40 odd years, but to actually run it efficiently is pretty hard. You know, heating, the pouring of the beer and that, because everything's so far away to keep it cold and different stuff like that. But also the outside of the building has been done up that many times over the years, and the inside is completely different to the original, like to the fact that to get it back to what you'd call a heritage building, we'd have to take the aluminium windows out of upstairs and all this sort of stuff, like, and a lot of the windows and fascias and stuff like that are actually rotten. So, I mean, you know, it takes a lot, as you can imagine, to keep this building going. So to get it to be historical, you're going to have to spend a lot of money, and I don't think it's really not worth it. I mean, you got transit there has got a 6 metre setback. They're going straight through the bar. So I mean, I don't know how that works. If they want the road, if they want the hotel, do they come in and just take it? Do they? Or so, you know, like there's a lot of things against it in my eyes, and I can't see the sense in spending all this money on something that could be pulled down anyway, you know, let alone trying to keep it up to what it's meant to be, which is not.
I think what I'm getting at is that the intent, so before it was listed, of what you were wanting to be able to do in terms of development of that site, and to be able to take that building forward in the site in terms of looking at the redevelopment that's there, and demolishing the building itself. And then the listing came upon you, which then meant a rethink in terms of where you wanted to go with that building. And so I really do feel that that's important as owners, you know, the impact of that, and in terms of your intent of where you want to take that, because a historic building, one of the intentions should be to enable to take that building into the future, but still retain the essence of the historic side of the building and the site. So really, I'm really interested in your intent with that, given that, yes, I hear about the funds, I hear that, but overall, kia ora.
I think, I'll speak first and then Russell, I don't want to be speaking for us, but I don't think there's any intent to upgrade the building to be a stunning heritage building that people will enjoy, because it's just too big a job. It's so already amended. It's too costly. The site is a very valuable one. There isn't an intent to demolish it tomorrow. Russell's in a state of uncertainty about what to do, but you add on to that.
Well, technically, it all started like 24 years ago. I brought the site because they were going to bulldoze it down. The transit were, right? Because they were going to put a motorway. Now, that was 24 years ago. And put it bluntly, I sort of thought, well, I can make $1 here, right? So technically, that's how it all started. But it has grown on me. I mean, it's great that the pub's still there, but it's got to a stage where moving forward, we had to do something with that site, and it was originally going to be pulled down and the Zeb was going to be there and I was going to build a new bar beside it. Now, over 4 years, this has taken to get through council and many hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it got to a stage where we had to change track because things like you weren't allowed 2 hotels in the same place, and although I don't know what they come from, but anyway, so we left the pub, the hotel there, and we've moved on to what it is now. But exactly what Fiona says, it costs too much now to run, and that was one of the main reasons why it was sort of going to be pulled down. You just can't afford to run those old buildings. You know, the upkeep on them. And that, you know, at this very point of time, I've just had a meeting with fire people and that, and to keep up with the times, they're taking all the historical door locks off and putting on it. We have to put on new ones, you know, to keep up with the times. All this sort of carry on. So, I mean, it's a continual. As you're going forward, it just continually gets worse and worse and worse.
And just to clarify, when Russell said he wasn't allowed to have two hotels at the same time, one of the issues of why he ended up leaving the Rollium where it was and putting Z next door is because Russell wanted to build the new tavern and keep the existing Rollium going until the tavern was completely built, and then he could transfer directly to the new tavern. But in their wisdom, the council said that we couldn't do that, so that the new tavern, the old building, had to be demolished before starting work on the new tavern, which means there'd be a 6-month, 12-month period when there was no tavern there. Russell would lose his liquor license and customer base and gaming license, and it just wasn't going to work.
Kia ora.
Yeah.
Kia ora, and thank you. And I'm sure in terms of the cost, we'll hear from your other support person in terms of that new policy 11, where that actually might sit in terms of support for you, but also too in terms of, we hear your intent now, but in terms of that balancing act between retaining and not retaining the status. Kia ora and thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Aston, I have a couple of questions I'll ask you now, if that's okay. Just to clarify the situation with the road widening, I think in your paragraph 12B, you mentioned that that this would compromise, I think you meant, you've put comprises, but I think you meant compromise the safety and efficiency of the state highway and plans for its future widening. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I understood that the road widening doesn't actually go into the building itself. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I've just been seeking clarification, and maybe Georgina and Russell can help, but as I understand it, that's correct. And there's a slip lane that's being built right at the moment. But when Z did their application, they had a car wash along the state highway frontage. They had to remove that because NZTA wanted the first 6 meters of their site to be kept for future road widening. So whilst it's not shown as a road widening designation, in those negotiations with NZTA to get their written approval, they said do nothing within the first 6 metres because we want that for future development. But it's not shown on any statutory planning documents. But in effect, if we wanted their consent, they would probably ask for the same, which would take it through the hotel building.
I had a couple of other questions. Thanks. I had a couple of other questions regarding your critique, I guess, of the Section 32 assessment.
Yes.
A couple of the panel members have had a look at the Section 32 report. It doesn't appear to identify the individual sites. It talks in sort of generic terms, I guess, in terms of the costs and benefits. And you've made it pretty clear in your view that should have been done for new listings, for new potential listings.
I do, yeah.
Yep. And I was going to ask, are you aware how other districts tackle that for new listings? No.
To be honest, I haven't looked at that.
Because I'm just conscious it might be quite a big exercise to potentially do that for all sites, but your point is that it should be done for new sites or proposed new sites.
Yes, okay, so yeah. I mean, I kind of, I mean, it's not a designation, but it has the effect of a designation and it's for the public good. So it's a situation where I think the onus is on the council to do the work.
Okay, just one other question. You highlighted the word of the void policy as being of concern. And you did attach your submission, and thank you for doing that, but it was quite lengthy, and I did scan through to look to see if you did lodge a submission on that particular policy.
No, we didn't.
You didn't. So your main relief is to not have the site listed. As simple as
but
that.
I mean, if there's any ability to soften down that policy as a consequential amendment, would be anything that could help. Yeah.
Thank you for that. No, thank you for answering those questions. Just hand over to my fellow panel members.
Thank you. Just got a couple of questions. So paragraph 14, I'm just interested in your views on policy 6, and I appreciate you've assessed it in relation to the Raleigh Inn listing. Paragraph 14.
Yep, okay.
I'm just interested, you said this is a high bar, and I'm just curious about that, because I mean, I'm looking at the policy, it just says will contribute to long-term viability, retention, ongoing use, and my understanding is that's reasonably common in I guess in amongst activities associated with heritage buildings and heritage settings, that adaptive reuse or anything that can provide for the ongoing use of that heritage item is actually quite helpful. And I'm just interested in your views on, is it really such a high bar, and can you not think of any activity on this site that would not in some way that would not contribute to it?
I mean, I accept that it's great if you do things that can contribute to the viability, retention, or ongoing use, but it shouldn't be exclusively requiring that. I mean, as the Z application makes clear, on this site, they want to put up a very large sign to identify and it has to be on this site because of the locational characteristics, has to be on this site, and it's supposed to contribute to the long-term viability, retention, or ongoing use of the heritage item, which clearly it doesn't, because it's for the purpose of the Z energy application. I think in the and there, I haven't read the application in detail, and I'm really straying into Georgina's territory, but you've got to think that the setting can be quite depending how it's defined, it can be quite a big area. There can be potential for further intensification of the use of the site, which might be for commercial activities that I suppose if they were in the same ownership, the funds the money that was generated from that could be put back into the heritage item, but it's not necessarily always going to be in the same ownership. So I just think it can be helpful in some situations, but it shouldn't be always requiring it to contribute. I just think that's an unrealistic added burden for owners of these sites that are already facing a lot of challenges by having to retain a building at some considerable cost often.
Yeah, because I am aware of signage on heritage buildings, such as even billboards, where the argument's been made that produces an income for the owner, which then gets put into supporting the heritage fabric.
But it doesn't necessarily.
Yeah.
I don't think Russell's getting any more money just because he's got to sign it. No, there's nothing coming to Russell from that.
And so the actual Z activity itself on the car park area that sign supports, that activity, you're not getting any money from that activity, the actual Z service station.
They pay me a lease.
Right.
And that's it. Part of that lease was to get the best I could, as you can imagine. Part of it was it all had to do with signs, whatever. Everything was left up to them, but that was just the one deal. That lease they give me, I don't get any money out of it all. Once that lease is signed, which it is, that's it. I don't get nothing else.
Right. So just for clarity, so the Z service station is on. Is that, do you own that site that it's going on? It's being leased, or is it someone else owns that?
No, I own all that.
You own
motels and everything.
Right. So there's an activity going on in the heritage setting that's generating income.
That's not the heritage setting.
That's not the
service
heritage, that's
station.
It's just the
completely
signages in the heritage
Yeah,
setting.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is,
The sign is, the service station is to the south of the heritage
Yes.
setting,
yes.
but the sign is right on the corner with Tennyson Street at the north. So the sign is
Okay.
the hotel is sandwiched between the Z
Yeah.
service station and the sign.
Signs on the corner of Brookside Road.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Main South
Yeah,
Road.
I saw the picture. It wasn't clear
Yeah.
how it was related to how the service station was related. So, thank you for clarifying that. Just as well in paragraph 24, you talk about costs and council justifying, I guess, a restricted planning framework, and that they've walked past the social and economic costs and benefits to the owner. So I guess I'm sort of interested in that. So I haven't noticed that cost is a criteria for listing. Is you saying in the RPS, for instance, or in the
No,
district
but
plan?
in any provision in a proposed plan that you
Yes.
put in, there is a obligation to undertake a section 32 assessment, which requires assessing the costs and benefits of that provision.
Yes.
So that's the context within
Right.
which I think it's essential that that work is done.
So would this cost, I guess I've been aware of many heritage buildings over the years, and I would imagine that the cost would be an argument for most of them. So I'm just interested. So are you suggesting that if it's too expensive, it shouldn't be listed, or are you just concerned that the assessment hasn't been done?
I'm concerned on both accounts. I'm concerned the assessment hasn't been done, and I think the costs and benefits are costs versus benefits. So it's a weighing up. So you have to look at the relative cost versus to the value to the public of having this building and what the alternatives are. So each one, the cost benefit calculation will be different. I think what we're saying here is this is being substantially altered over a very long period of time. The bit that was visible to the public is none of that is original, and in that context, in my opinion, there isn't a detailed cost benefit analysis, but just from what my conversations with Russell, I think the costs will outweigh the benefits.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Just to add to that, the boundary of the hotel is 1 metre off the motorway. Now, the police, there's two main doors go out to the Main South Road. The police want them shut because they reckon they're dangerous. But you can't shut them because they're fire exit doors, right? So health and safety and all that won't allow that. So we're getting to a situation now where they're putting in a slip road, which is going to be very busy because it's going to be servicing McDonald's, BP, Tennyson Street, Brookside Road, and Z. So there's actually going to be technically more traffic going down this one lane, and we're going to be walking out of a hotel that's a metre off with no barriers, nothing. Now, it becomes a real hassle because it's not only for the poor people that get hit, it's for the person that owns the hotel that's responsible if anything does happen, because it comes back to all the drinking and all the other stuff that goes with it. So we're in a very, very difficult situation, really. Like the whole thing is starting to sort of compound. And I tried to do the best by pulling it down, but council wouldn't let me, or it got too difficult. So I've only got a certain amount of money, and it's cost too much now. And they actually, even now going forward, if we make it what you people want, well, it's going to be more of a nightmare, because he's going to be responsible for all the stuff, you know, like going out the doors and all the shit fight that goes on.
Just clarify that it's not what the panel wants. We're an independent panel.
Sorry,
Yeah, so
fair comment,
but
yeah.
we understand the point you're making.
Yeah, no, fair comment, sorry.
No, that's fine.
No further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't think there are any. We've got Ms. McPherson, and I have some planning questions of her as well. So we might come back to you, Ms. Aston, after we've heard from her. Okay. Thank you. So are you okay to join in now, Ms. McPherson? Can you hear us? And you obviously
Yes,
can.
I can hear you. Can you hear me clearly now?
Yes, that sounds fine. So yeah, thank you for preparing your statement. There's quite a lot of detail in there, and we've skimmed through that because there's a lot of information to absorb about the developments, the Z consent and so forth. So what I'd invite you to do is to highlight the key things that you think we should be aware of for our consideration of whether this site should be listed or not. And then we'll see if we have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for accommodating the alternative format of Zoom as part of a physical hearing. It mixes things up a bit. I know it's not quite ideal, but it was good to have the option there to do that. So I think Fiona's really covered those key matters that have come up as a concern through the process of applying for these consents in relation to the heritage provisions. And I think I'll just run briefly through the summary of evidence to speak to each of those key points, and that is that as has been pointed out, the heritage listing came into effect partway through the specific service station application being lodged, and that did then change some of the consenting requirements around some works that had been proposed to the Raleigh Inn itself. And as a result of that, Z sought legal advice as to how to proceed. And the advice was that the application be changed so as to avoid the potential for quite significant costs and risks that the heritage listing brought to the application because of the lack of clarity around the specific values of the building that sought to be protected under that listing in the proposed plan. There's some quite clear links in there in that listing around the social and community values of the Raleigh Inn, but alongside that, it's quite clear that the building has undergone some very substantial alterations, including a complete rebuild following a fire, and then a number of other additions and alterations that quite substantially change its physical form and mean the physical values attached to it are quite unclear. And if you're looking at doing an assessment of a particular proposal in the context of the H210 listing, it's quite unclear what should be protected out of that and where you would go with preparing an application. And it's quite clear in the case law that because of the significant implications for including provisions like this, where there's which result in quite significant limitations. In this case, you've got the avoidance policies tied to the consenting requirements, that the onus is on the council to clearly and properly justify the reasons for including the listings, and including those restrictions on a particular feature. I think we've touched on some of the issues that were experienced with the state highway setting and NZTA, and there was significant discussions with NZTA through the course of that application. which, as has been pointed out, have resulted in the layout of the service station site, with the shop being brought right back from the road and the car wash facility being removed from the application to provide for a potential extension of the highway. I'm not quite clear where NZTA has got on their position on that. There have been discussions around them looking to amend their designation, but that is something that sits with them. But again, it's something that has come up through our discussions with NZTA in relation to the signage application, and that the foundations of that sign have been specifically designed so that it could be relocatable. And that was one of the bases for NZTA providing the written approval to that specific application. In relation to the prime sign application, it is the reasons for that application really are tied up again with the uncertainty around what is happening with State Highway 1 in this location. And NZTA has quite clearly signalled that they'll be looking to incorporate a slip lane. That would mean that to access the Z site, motorists need to turn off the state highway some way before they actually reach the Z service station site. And so to ensure that drivers are able to make that decision and know that the Z service station is there, this prime sign has been proposed in a visible location, which is within the setting of the Raleigh Inn Heritage Building. A significant amount of assessment had been put together as part of the consent application from a planning perspective, and also really drilling down into the reasons for the heritage setting being identified in the proposed plan. And that appears to focus on the presence of some stables to the rear of the Raleigh Inn in the past, and the archaeological potential of those features. The evidence presents a series of aerial photographs, though, that do quite clearly show a physical separation between the location of the proposed sign now and the heritage building, the Raleigh Inn itself, which really, I think, draws quite a strong question around the merits of including that particular part of the site within the heritage setting. And again, underlines the importance of the council getting it right in terms of any listing of the building, because those trickle down effects in terms of the implications for the landowner and any future developments are quite significant in terms of the consenting process. In the case of this particular application, we've had lengthy discussions with the council processing officer around the approach to be taken, some of the uncertainty around the values identified in the listing, and what we should be focusing on in terms of doing any specialist assessment. The requests for further information have led to Z doing a visual impact assessment, which addressed some of the concerns raised around visual impacts and particularly the landmark status of the building. Unfortunately, from our perspective, that hasn't been enough, and council has pursued the request for a specialist heritage assessment. But the basis for that appears to be simply the fact that the building and its setting are listed in the plan, rather than necessarily any link to the nature and scale of effects of the particular proposal. And again, it comes back around to I think the whole package of provisions, the very restrictive nature of them, the significant implication that does have on the landowner in any future development. And so the need to be really sure that the provisions are right, both in terms of any need to continue to include the building and its setting in the proposed plan. And if it is still in there, the extent of the heritage setting does need to be accurate in terms of the values that might actually be there, and in terms of any specific values associated with the building, which currently just are not clear enough to be able to make a clear assessment.
Thank you. We'll just see if we have any questions. Okay. Nicole?
Thanks for your evidence. I've got a question around, so page 17, it talks about the risk of adverse effects on heritage is low and will be appropriately managed by the adoption of the following accidental discovery protocols. So this is basically AEE. Is it standard to adopt a discovery protocol on any sort of works? Is this a generic thing? I'm just thinking about the wider question around heritage settings and the potential that there may be something there. Can it hold for outside of being heritage settings? I'm just wondering about that.
So that section you've pointed out as an attachment to the evidence, and that was included as part of the consent application. I would say that it really depends on the reasons for the heritage setting being identified in a plan. In this case, our reading of the scheduling is that the heritage setting draws quite strongly on the presence of historic buildings on the southern side of the Raleigh Inn, and that's the horse stable, which has now been removed. And so the suggestion in the listing is that it's an archaeological feature, and that then is something that you would quite commonly address through an accidental discovery protocol. In some cases, a heritage setting might be linked more to the visual merits of a building or more above ground type values. So I wouldn't say that a heritage setting always has archaeological elements to it as well. But I think in this case, the scheduling is drawing that link, and that's where we've gone with looking to address those particular concerns in this case through an accidental discovery protocol.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Ms. McPherson. Just in relation to your views about the lack of values being, properly defined by the officers, I guess, or by the council in their decision to list this building, you would have looked at the historic heritage item record form, the HHIRF. You would have been through that. I've got that in front of me now, and I'm just going through it, and it does have a description of the setting, the history, historical and social significance, cultural and spiritual significance, the architectural and aesthetic significance, technological and craftsmanship significance, contextual and architectural and scientific significance. And it sort of sums it up by saying that the Rolleston Hotel has overall heritage significance to Rolleston. It's basically the first hotel in Rolleston, I guess, and there's a description of it being a local landmark. And in other words, from a cursory look through that, it appears to touch on all the relevant criteria and come to a conclusion on that. So what is it that you're telling us that hasn't been done adequately? Can you just expand on that, please?
Sure. Because I think there's a lack of clarity around the physical attributes of the building that would require protection through this specific listing. I agree. There's a very strong signal in that form that the hotel has significant social significance to the district. It's been there and used as an pub over many years. But then if you're starting to look at the physical attributes and what of those would require protecting through a specific consent application, that's where it starts to lose that clarity, and that's tied in with the significant changes to the fabric of the building. So, for example, we're looking at this particular application for a sign. It's in a location where we believe it is quite separate to the values associated with the historic stables and their archaeological significance, because it's right on the opposite side of the building. And in fact, in an area that had historically been separated by a road. And so there is no clear historic link between the use of this portion of the site and the use of the remainder of the hotel. And so you're then looking at in this situation, it's a sign that's clearly not going to have any effects on the physical form of the building. But it's been through a assessment of visual effects in which the council has agreed those visual effects will be low, including on the context of the building as a landmark.
Thank you for that. If I understand it correctly, what your key concern is that components of the building or components of the site have not been separated and separately evaluated. I guess that it's a generic. I think what you're saying is it's a generic assessment of the building as a whole and the significance of it, rather than looking at the component parts, because we're not here to consider the Z sign application. We're here to consider whether the building should be listed. And I think, am I understanding you correctly, that they haven't evaluated the individual components of the building and the values that they have, such as the stables and the likes? Is that your key point there?
Yes.
It is, okay. That's fine. Thank you for that. I'll just see if the panel have any other questions on that.
Thank you for your evidence. Just a couple of things, and I just want, if you can just clarify paragraph 2.4. You talk about your experience and you identify relevant heritage experience. Experience and heritage provisions includes in relation to, and you refer to district plan reviews and plan change processes in there. So it's clear to me that you've got experience such as in relation to plan development. What I'm not clear on in your statement of evidence is, have you done heritage assessments of the type that the council would have done in order to justify the listing of this building in the first place? Have you done that level of detail of heritage work?
Well, no, those sorts of assessments are typically done by a heritage specialist,
okay,
with a specific qualification in the heritage area. The involvement of a planner then is in reading and interpreting those assessments and applying them in a planning context. So it comes through in the assessment of the appropriateness of how those listings might be applied through a plan, and the implications then in terms of going through a consent process through various activity statuses and the links through the policy framework, and ensuring that there is a pathway through a policy framework for various activities to be undertaken in relation to heritage buildings.
Right. No, thank you for
But-
clarifying. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
but key to that obviously is that it draws on the original assessment of the heritage building and the role that plays in linking it through to the planning provisions.
Yes, thank you. And I read your evidence in which Commissioner Ray has asked you questions about as well in relation to the sort of the physical attributes of the building and how that's been recorded. So I read that with interest, and I looked at the assessment that's been provided, the H2110, and it's about 3 pages long. And I looked at a few others in the district plan, and they also appear to be about 3 pages long. And I looked at some listings in the Christchurch district plan and the supporting documents behind those, and they also appear to be about 2 to 3 pages long. So there's a lot of consistency across all these listings, and they seem to all be very light touch on the physical values, which is one of your criticisms of this particular listing. And that's just an observation really, but I'm interested in maybe a question to staff, whether there is other evidence that's not in this district plan or in this overview that actually provides greater detail around the physical components, because these appear to be quite formulaic, these assessments in this plan and in other plans, and also seem to be quite brief, potentially purposefully. So I'm just interested in, is there any other background information on that is available and that can be provided to applicants and their experts, through a district plan review process, but also through a hearing consent application process. Thank you.
Thank you for that. You don't need to answer that, but certainly this is a theme that's coming up with some other submitters who are coming to present to us, that there's a critique of the degree of assessment that's been carried out as part of the Section 32. So we'll be interested to hear the officer's response to that. And so thank you for highlighting that. I just had one question of the team, I guess, and Mr. Lilly might be able to help too. Has the hotel has there ever been any attempt to list this building as a heritage building? Is this the first time that this has become an issue for you?
First time, yeah.
First time,
First
okay.
time I know of it, actually.
Right, okay.
I've been drinking there for about 30 odd
Right.
years, and I've owned it for 24,
So I think the point that your team, I guess, is making is that this is a new proposal that's been considered, and a fair degree of assessment should be done to be able to convince us that it needs to be listed. So we'll be particularly interested in going through the evidence on that. So thank you for making those points.
Thank you.
And we have no further questions. So right on time. Thank you.
Okay.
We'll take a short break now for 15 minutes and come back at 10:45. Thank you. Right, thank you everyone for attending. We'll reconvene the hearing, starting with Nicola Willett, if she's here. Please come forward. Thank you, Ms. Willett. Yes, you can, yes. We're sort of going through a process where we take it off when we're speaking, and it's particularly difficult to see through glasses when they're steamed up, and so. Yes, that's right. But yeah, thank you for coming along as well. Yes. Oh, you have. Okay. We'll have those handed out if someone can. Is anyone able to collect those? There we go. Justine, thank you. Thank you for that. We have read the officer report discussion on your site, and so we've got a little bit of background on it. So we welcome your additional comments. In your hands as to how you wish to present that to us. Thank you.
Good. Okay. So thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Nicola Margaret Willett. I have a Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Laws, and I've worked exclusively in the excellent compensation field for the last 30 years. I must say I'm not a planning expert, and I'm here as the owner-occupier of a property that is proposed to be listed. So together with my husband, Malcolm Bruce Lyle, we have owned since 1991 our property at 520 Springs Road, Prebbleton, referred to in the documents as the former Prebbleton School Teachers House, or H330. And I think it will never again be referred to as H330 in our household. Prior to purchasing the property in 1991, Malcolm and I made extensive inquiries regarding whether the house might be the subject of protection by the then Historic Places Trust. We were aware, of course, of the age of the house and that it sat on a plot that had been uninterrupted for some time. We arranged for a visit by the then chair of the trust in Canterbury, and we were told that the house was a typical Canterbury workers' cottage and would not be listed as it did not have sufficient historical significance within the region. Having learnt this, we were satisfied that we could make the necessary changes to enable the house to be suitable for family living, as the house had multiple small rooms. It was still really, as it probably had been for some considerable time, there were many small rooms, and it was very utilitarian, and that it had been built as the schoolmaster's house, not the parsonage. So it was not built of expensive timbers, and it certainly didn't have decorative features apart from some on the exterior, which were normal at the time, of course. Those, of course, had gone by the time we purchased the property. When we moved into the house in January 1991, it was in a very poor state. The previous owner, Ms. Ruth Mason, had owned the property since the 1960s. Ms. Mason had undertaken minimal maintenance and no upgrading. And there's an interesting story to tell about Ms. Mason's occupation. She was the first female botanist in New Zealand and collected books. So most of the small rooms were actually full of books, and many of those were sold to raise funds for the local community. Much of the historic fabric of the house had been lost. For example, the wooden fretwork, which was seen on the exterior, and I have some plans which show exactly what would have been there in the 1875 and 1883 when it was altered, had been lost. The bay window from the front of the property had, according to legend, and a lot of people called in after we moved into the house to tell us about things that had happened while they lived there. Miss Mason was quite eccentric, and evidently the bay window had simply rotted away, and one day she got someone to come round, cut it off, and a window was put in its place, a very unsympathetic window. She actually left a tree in front of it, which never quite got out of its plastic container, and the plastic container had clearly shattered at some point, because I found little pieces of it, and the tree just grew straight up in front of that window. That aided the rats enormously in getting into the property. So it was a rat highway for a very long time. So we set about undertaking major changes to the property, and in 1993 we added an extension to the house on the William Street side with a floor area of 153 metres squared. This is larger than the footprint of the original house. It contains a hallway, bathroom, toilet, laundry, 4-bay garage and a workshop with a large office and music room in the upstairs area. Now, if you just go to your pack that I provided you, you'll see an aerial view of the house, and it shows the extension, which is then marked in orange on the second view, and you'll see how extensive that addition is. So it was surprising to see it described in the report that was done for this listing application as an attached outbuilding. It's clearly not that. The kitchen we extended the kitchen by 10.5 metres squared, and that is part of that shown in orange. The kitchen extension is on a concrete pad. We took out internal walls, creating one living area, which took in the existing bathroom, toilet, 2 small rooms and a hallway. We rebuilt the front bay window and began the process of returning the original fretwork. We have replaced floors, walls, external timber, internal timber, windows and doors, all of this at our own cost and in our own time. We have also significantly changed the parcel of land on which the house sits. We have removed trees and planted extensive gardens. We excavated and paved a large area at the back of the property, which was 125 metres squared. I must say I was delighted when we undertook this work because our house was painted in lead-based paint when we arrived there. It hadn't been painted in a very long time and much of it had flaked off. When I decided to have children, I was extraordinarily concerned that they would consume that lead to their, with health effects, of course. So we set about making sure that that was covered. And I must say that it was a major concern for me. To illustrate this changes, as I said, I provided those photographs. And I've also provided just some photographs of the external of the house. I have photos of the internal of the house as they were when we moved in. I've always been a bit of an archivist and I made sure that everything was documented. To say it was in a sorry state is probably an exaggeration. There were many people who thought that we were completely mad to buy this house and to move in and live there while we renovated. The property at 520 Springs Road is therefore extensively changed from the property that we moved into in 1991 and very different in character and form from the house that was built in 1875. Now, I consider that the listing of our home and all its land would place an unfair burden on us as the owners. It's ironic to me that we are the people who saved this house. We saved it from demolition by neglect. There's no doubt in my mind that had any other person purchased that property in 1991, it would have been levelled and the property subdivided. Now, I can't know that for sure, but I can tell you I know what I took on, and it was a big job. And I say we saved it together, Malcolm and I, and it seems deeply ironic now that we are going to be placed under the onerous requirement of requiring a resource content, both the cost that will entail and the time and the energy every time we want to do something that we do lovingly of our own time and energy without being asked. So it just seems an unfair burden. I consider that in these circumstances, it is for the council to justify why it's appropriate to list our house. And I do not consider that has been done, and I do not consider that it is appropriate to list it. And I do that for the following reason. I say that for the following reasons. The house has had, as I've already said, substantial alterations. The large addition in 1993 is not part of the original house. The addition in 1993 was not designed by a notable architect, although I now know that perhaps parts of the house might have been. It was designed by Malcolm, perhaps on the back of an envelope one day over dinner. We did, of course, have significant help in turning that design into a real
into the property that it is now. But I say he went to enormous efforts to make that extension meld in seamlessly with the house. He had the timber milled, so it was the same size as the timber on the original house. And our home, which has been in a couple of fundraising garden tours, people have been unable to distinguish the start and the finish of the property, and are surprised when they see the photos of what it looked like originally. The interior, and so in terms of that large extension, it's important, and this is a point I want to make very clearly, it has no cultural or historical significance, and to require us, if the whole house is listed, to apply for a resource consent every time we want to do maintenance on that part of the house is onerous indeed. And really, in my submission, quite ridiculous. The interior of the house no longer represents a house of its age. It's completely different. Yes, we have, because we like history and we have tried to maintain the feel of a house of its age, it certainly doesn't represent the type of lifestyle that would have existed in a house of its age. And although the house was built to house school teachers from Pearson School, the house has no ongoing association with the school. And I can say this as someone who was the chair of the Board of Trustees for many years, and there simply is no association with the school and the house. The house is not known locally as the school teacher's house. If its historic and social significance is through its association with the school, then this would be more appropriately noted by a plaque somewhere near the property, in my view. And Dr. McEwen, who undertook the investigation, notes that the house and land have an early association with the Anglican Church. This association ended in 1948 when the Anglican Church property trustees sold the house and land. There's been no ongoing association with All Saints Church or the Anglican Church property trustees. If the historic and social significance of the house is through its association with the Anglican Church, that association has been long lost. And similarly to the association with the school, this would be best demonstrated by some form of plaque or storyboard near the house, and we would certainly have no objection to that. The assessment of our property as a heritage item is difficult to understand when the home of Mr. John Norris Toswell, Mr. Toswell gifted the land, which is the portion upon which the All Saints Church, our house and the parsonage all sit. He gifted the land. His house still stands in the Kenbray subdivision in Prebleton. His house predates our house because clearly he was there when he gifted the land. But his house has not been listed as a heritage item. And I consider this exposes a very real problem with the assessment of Dr. Anne McEwen. Dr. McEwen's reporting was based on a paper review rather than an understanding, in my view, of the communities that she was assessing the properties within. I understand that she did not speak to or consult with our local heritage group, which is very active. I have serious, and she certainly did not consult with us as owners of the property. And if I can say one thing, which is slightly off topic, but I would like it noted by anybody who is a representative of the council in the room, I've personally found this the approach that was taken here insulting. We should have been consulted. We should have been part of this process. She should have knocked on our door. We should have at least had a letter to say that she was going to undertake an investigation, and could she meet with us? If we'd said no, completely understandable, but there was no such approach. And had she spoken to me, I would have been able to provide her with all the documentary evidence that I have about the house's history and so on. It would have aided and abetted her in writing a more fulsome report, in my view. So she missed that opportunity, and because she did not enter the property, and it seems from her report she didn't even properly view the house because she said it was obscured by trees from the front, and you can see from the photo, it's really just a photo of the roof line of the house. She describes what you now see as a large extension to the property as a garage and a half-storey attached outbuilding. Well, as you can see, in fact, it's a two-storey extension to the house with a greater floor area than the existing house. So it's my view that her reporting can't be relied upon. you intend to list our property and all its setting, particularly when this is a decision that is going to have very serious financial consequences for Malcolm and myself. I note that in the Section 32 report provided to Selwyn District Council, there is a potential benefit for the surrounding property values of being close to heritage items. Well, hooray for everyone who lives around us. Yet the impact on our property value of the listing appears to be ignored. In our case, the value of our land, and you can see that simply by searching the government valuation, is far greater than the value of the house. So the value in our property, and sadly, I don't think this is right, but it's just a fact, is in the underlying property. We have 4 to 5 sections in that half acre, and it's not difficult to do the math when sections in Prebbleton itself are over $500,000. So we estimate that the economic loss of our loss of opportunity is great. The inclusion of the entire parcel will restrict our use of our land without, in my view, any identifiable benefit to the community. I note that the reason for listing the entire site is said to be because of the potential archaeological significance. Now, when we purchased the house in 1991, it was with the existing parcel of land, which was 2,000 metres squared, roughly half an acre. We have extensively gardened the land that is now not covered with dwelling. We have removed large trees which required excavation of the land. We have paved a large area which again required excavation, and all excavation going down to the clay pan. Now in that, the aerial shot that has the orange with the extension to the house, I have marked in black all the areas that have been excavated to the clay pan. So it's extensive, and Malcolm and I are quite careful people, and we made sure, I mean, for goodness sake, if we found something significant, we would want that known. So we've always been quite careful to see what we would find, and it's always been a family joke that eventually we will find that gold bullion, but no such luck. But what I have found is 2 sets of false teeth, so they're available if anybody wants them. So at no point have we discovered anything of archaeological significance. I'm sure the false teeth were important to the person who owned them. I'm grateful to the panel that a question was asked regarding the obligation of the council to establish what the potential archaeological values were. I was interested in the response, and I think it was a little self-serving. It just went back to what the council's put in its own objectives and policies and plans. It doesn't go into detail about what the current state of the law is, and that's to, if something is to be required to be an archaeological site, it needs to be on reasonable grounds, and there needs to be significant evidence relating to the historical and cultural heritage of New Zealand. Yes, our section has half an acre that has been used for living for a very long time, but if we use the basis that it's just undisturbed land, well, surely every piece of farmland, every lifestyle block, everything that hasn't got a dwelling on it in New Zealand should be subject to a historical listing, a heritage listing. It is, just to me, it simply doesn't make sense that our whole property, and I'm not talking about the setting, because the setting really is the setting of the house. So as long as you can see the house, the frontage of the house, I personally hate it when a house is planted right in front of a historical property, because it completely ruins the visual appeal of the property. I've no time for that. But this is much more extensive than that. The portion that you can see that is bounded by William Street, the corner of William Street and Springs Road, is a large portion of our section, and Malcolm and I had from time to time mused that we might build ourselves a small easy care property on that site. You'll deny us that opportunity if you list the entire portion of our property, and really I cannot see that there is any benefit to the community in doing that. So it's my firm view that the decision to list our property and all the surrounding land as a heritage item in the Selwyn District Plan will not further the objective of the plan to protect historic heritage items from inappropriate subdivision use and development. It will, however, cause extra cost and inconvenience to Malcolm and I as the owners of the property. We will need to apply for and pay for resource consents to undertake work that we are now able to undertake, and which we do with no such impediment. It is entirely possible that if we were impeded in our ability to maintain and upgrade our property in this way, that as we have for the last 30 years, that we will really have to consider our other options and leave it to the market to decide who will be the new guardian of this property. And I've already mentioned the underlying value of this property in terms of the land. It's now in a very ironically desirable neighbourhood. It wasn't once. To suggest that the new owner might not decide just to let the house decay. And I can tell you, in a house of its age that is timber, that wouldn't take long. And then simply apply for demolition on economic grounds. It's cynical and wrong, but it's a real problem in New Zealand in terms of our protection of heritage. You've attempted to protect a property that is already protected while it is in our hands. And if it is listed as a heritage item, you will impede us in our ability to continue to protect it. I urge you not to list this property and the surrounding land. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Willett. I think the panel would be remiss not to acknowledge the good work you've done, you and your husband have done, and the passion you've put into this property. You know, it's admirable. So, you know, we fully appreciate that. In terms of the first question from me, really, in terms of the implications of the listing, I guess, if it goes ahead, you mentioned that it would impede you from doing the normal things you do on the property, the maintenance, I think you mentioned. I'm just curious to understand how the rules would be triggered by maintenance activities. Have you had a look at that?
Well, I understand that anything in terms of maintenance, we wouldn't need, simple maintenance, we wouldn't need a resource consent, but certainly there are still major works to be done that we would need to, as I understand it, apply for resource consents to do. So, for example, if we were to, at the moment, I'm not sure if you can see it on any of the pictures, but the external work on the exterior of the house does not match what was there. We would like to replace that. That would require a resource consent, and we would have to, as I understand it, we would then have to use, rather than what I would call the innovative techniques that Malcolm has been particularly good at in terms of using his own abilities, we would then have to defer to someone else who would tell us what the correct conservation techniques are. So we have done things that perhaps might not technically have been the way that it would be done.
All right, and in terms of the what's referred to as an extension, although you've pointed out it's possibly the same size as the house itself.
Yes.
To what degree do you think that affects the reasons why the main building is listed? Does it undermine the original listing of that, potential listing of that building? Do you think, you obviously think not enough attention's been paid to the importance of that?
Well, it's simply not the same house that was there in 1875. But the picture that I've provided you with of the back of the house shows the extension to the kitchen that we added on, and then that carries on. And if you see the picture with the digger, there's the two-story extension that's been built on, which is the extension to the house. So it just seems to me that to list the whole house as it isn't the house that it was in 1875, and or when the extensions were done in 1883. And if the purpose is to have the historical fabric of the house retained, the time to have done that would have been I guess when Miss Mason moved out, because then it really was as it, well, apart from the fact that it had lost its bay window and it didn't have its fretwork and it was in a very, very poor state of repair, it still represented how a house would have looked on the property at that time. It doesn't now. It's interesting that property at 12 Toswell Road, which is listed and I understand has a Historic Places Trust listing, is the sister house of our property. And it's how we discovered exactly what the fretwork and the bay was. So in this particular picture, you'll see we've replaced the fretwork from a very, it had been replaced because it rotted. And actually the veranda is now a concrete pad, which was also done just clearly for utilitarian maintenance purposes by a previous owner. So we put this bay window back on and we use the house on Toswell Road as our template for doing that, understanding that our house, and we did have a photo of a wedding that took place, and the photos were taken on the veranda of our house so that we knew that it was similar. So, and that house in the interior is as a house would have been at the turn of the century. So it has not had the renovate, so it's still got its timbers and it's still all small rooms. It's much more authentic of the historic fabric, if that's what we're trying to preserve here. Yeah.
And some submitters have asked us to consider listing parts of buildings rather than a whole building, and
Yes.
you've sort of gone into that a little bit. What would your attitude be to listing just the original part of the?
Well, I think that would go some way to allaying our fears. I think I sort of have a hierarchy. I think listing the entire plot is a very poor outcome for us, because it means that there are some plans that we might have for the future, which we would always do sympathetically to the house, wouldn't be allowed to happen. Without great cost. I think it's ridiculous that the extension is included as a heritage item. I mean, it can't possibly be. It was built in 1991, and it certainly had it didn't have a notable architect, unless Malcolm's hiding his light under a bushel.
Not the only one before us that's a 1990s edition that's being requested for inclusion. So it's we've considered another one today already that has that situation.
Yes, but Dr. McEwen didn't include. She didn't even know about the extension, really. She misunderstood its size and importance on the property. Yes, the extension, and then if I suppose it's my view that the house is under no threat presently. So the listing doesn't assist in the aims of listing while putting a burden upon us. And so it would be my I don't know if I can call it my if there is an option that I could live with, that would be it, that the original part of the house.
That's very helpful, thank you. And I've asked you a lot of questions already, so I'll hand over to
Right. Thank you.
Kia ora, and thank you. I also would just like to say that thank you for your submission. Thank you, and no, I have no additional questions.
Thank you. Kia ora.
Our chair's covered. Thank you.
I just want to add, thank you very much for the photos. It's given more of a context to the property and the comments that you've made. I've got no other comments, but thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your evidence, the photos as well, and obviously I appreciate that. I understand your frustration around doing the works to maintain the building and return it to glory over time, and then the fruits of your labour as a result in the listing. I understand that, and I've heard you. Just one question, one of my questions has already been asked, but I have one remaining question. You talk about rezoning the site to commercial. Have you put a submission in seeking that?
No, I understood that that was something that perhaps could be considered, but the planner's response indicated that it wasn't something that we could do. And no, I haven't put in a submission to change it to commercial. It wouldn't be my. I mean, this is my home. I don't necessarily want it to be a cafe or a bar, but I can see that that is an extremely important part of preserving heritage properties, and particularly it's difficult to see, it's difficult to explain, but when we moved to Prevaton in 1991, it was a very sleepy village. There was hardly anybody there. Our house was in the heart of the village, but there were only about 2 shops, and they were sort of just across the road. You know, we knew everybody. There were only 3 streets, so we knew everybody, and the school was small. Now it's, you know, it's a town, and it's a town that now has a commercial heart, which is being built directly opposite us. So the position of our home has changed enormously, and that's why I made that suggestion that if you truly wanted to save and preserve this property forever, the way to do that would be to allow a commercial listing. And no, I haven't made a submission on that myself. Yeah.
Oh, thank you for clarifying.
Thank you, Ms. Willett, for coming in and presenting to us. We may go past the site. You've been very helpful in providing a number of photographs, but it's not far away, so we may well go and have a look at that.
Welcome a site visit. The kettle is always on.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Right. We'll now move to Helen Reid. If Helen's there, would you mind coming forward? Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Reid. Thank you for taking the time and trouble to come to the hearing. We've read the staff report as it addresses your submission, and we're in your hands as to how you wish to present that to us. And we may have some questions, so please go ahead.
Good morning. As I said, my name is Helen Reid, and thank you for allowing me to speak to this submission. Our history is important, whether it is people's story or buildings. I was brought up in Halkett, 30 k's west of Christchurch, on a property that has been in our family since 1877. I inherited this piece of land at Aylesbury, which is where the shed is that I'm asking for help with. The shed, made from flattened fuel drums, measures 9 metres long, 8 metres wide, 2 metres plus high. After World War II, there was a shortage of iron, but there was plenty of empty fuel drums. That is 44 gallons in the old measurement. That was how fuel arrived at farms in the 1950s. Clarence William Fowler rented the house that was on the farm. He was a self-taught engineer, a shearer, a farmhand, an all-around good guy. One of his passions was building stuff out of whatever he could find. His workshop was built from these flattened fuel drums. They were everywhere on farms where he was working. He and his brothers set about flattening drums, and so began his engineering business. At the workshop, he built a machine from an old Dodge truck. An old water tank held the water, and from this he became a spraying contractor, travelling wherever. Bankside to Springfield, to West Melton, and everywhere between. Spraying crops, potatoes, whatever had to be done. He was well known in the district, seen speeding around the district with his very distinctive machine in all weathers. The workshop he created is over 80 years old. It is falling down, overgrown. So from the pictures that I submitted in the beginning, it's not particularly good photo. My family think it is worth saving by taking down and assembling where? At a vintage museum. I've got a question mark behind that. We need assistance to remove it. That is why I'm here to ask the Historic Heritage for help. Being part of the farm belonging to my parents, which my daughter-in-law farms since the death of her husband, my son, in future, the land this building is on could become farmland. In the meantime, we are doing little by little amounts. New Zealand is bursting with heritage places, but they aren't always easy to find. And if someone is not looking out for them, they will disappear. Farmland is being taken by housing. We also need food. I feel very strongly that history like Clary's are being lost. These people work tirelessly for an income and they deserve recognition of their story.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Reid. We'll just see if we have any questions.
Yep.
First of all. Nicole? Nicole? Yeah.
Sorry, just having a look back through your initial submission and your photos that were attached to that, and then rereading what you'd put. So it's a shed that's made for the flattened fuel drums that you're talking about,
Yes.
and then you're talking about a cottage.
There
as
is also
well.
a cottage there, but we'll just stick with the workshop, I think.
Okay, so that's what you're wanting listed. Now, what do you see as why are you wanting it listed particularly?
I just think it is something that happened in the history. There is another one like it at Mesopotamia Station and another one down south somewhere. But I think it would be good to keep it in Canterbury.
So what do you see some advantages in it being listed? I'm just trying to get a handle. So what do you
just
think?
it's part of Canterbury's history, and with the earthquake and as time goes by, these buildings get older and they fall down, or somebody just says, I don't care, I want the land. That's it.
Okay, thank you for coming in to speak to us. Thanks.
No questions. Just wanted to thank you for coming in today and you know, and I guess being quite passionate about the values that you see and the importance of historic heritage to you and as you in the wider district. So thank you for that.
All right.
Thank you. And I've got no further questions. That was well said by my fellow commissioner. Thank you for coming along.
Thank you.
Yep. Right. Okay, thanks. We'll move to the next submitter now. Roman Catholic Diocese of Christchurch. So please come forward when you're ready. Oh, I'll get this off. Thank you, gentlemen. I'll just allow you to introduce yourselves and tell us how you wish to present today. Thank you. Okay.
So this submission today is in regards what was in the proposed district plan as heritage item 166, St. Joseph's Catholic Church. Darfield. Thank you for the opportunity to submit to the hearing today. My name is Terry Foote. I'm Project Manager Property with the Catholic Diocese of Christchurch. With me on my left is Father Brian Fennessy, the parish priest of the Catholic parish of Selwyn. And on my right, Bernard Duncan, Selwyn Catholic Parish Finance Committee and a parishioner, long-term parishioner of St. Joseph's Catholic Church in Darfield. So St. Joseph's Catholic Church, 1981 Telegraph Road, Darfield, is legally owned by the Corporation Sole, the Roman Catholic Bishop of the Diocese of Christchurch. This entity holds the property for and on behalf of the Selwyn parish, which owns the property under Roman Catholic canon law. We are representing both these parties jointly in our submission today.
Sorry, I'll just pause for a moment. We did get an email came through about half an hour ago with your statement. I'm just wondering if it's possible to get that printed for us. Can that be arranged just so that we have that in front of us?
Sure.
We'll just, well, first of all, how long is that? It's several pages, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, did you receive that by email? Yeah, okay. And we haven't all got access to it right now. So, look, you go ahead and we'll get that. That'll come back and then it might generate some questions, but by all means proceed for the moment. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As noted in the historic heritage item record for the church, it was opened in 1937. It has been lovingly cared for by members of the parish community over the subsequent 84 years. Heritage listing has not been required for the care provided to the building over this time. The church has not been listed previously. We have no intention of removing or demolishing the church. We want to protect and preserve it, but we do not want to be held back by incurring extra costs of obtaining a resource consent to carry out the works to improve the building. St. Joseph's Catholic Church was damaged in the Canterbury earthquakes and necessary damage has been repaired. Pricing has been received to improve the seismic strength of the building and carry out more substantial maintenance and some optional improvements. Because of the listing, we will incur unbudgeted costs of having to obtain a resource consent. That will involve a heritage expert, a planner and lawyer to do even something as simple as replacing the roof with a different material to the material currently used. We have been advised to expect costs of $50,000 to $100,000 for resource consents and the experts as above for any work which is not repairs and maintenance, and repairs and maintenance is very limited. Our concern at the historic heritage listing is the disadvantage that the listing brings to the effective owners of the property, being the Catholic parishioners of Selwyn, who must obtain any additional expenses required as a result of the listing through donations and fundraising. So we have the following points for consideration today by the commissioners. Council assistance. If the Selwyn district thinks the building is important and should be protected, then the district must be prepared to assist in any costs that would be over and above the normal costs incurred if the church wasn't listed. The current district plan includes a policy, B3310, to assist landowners where funds are available with costs associated with the maintenance or restoration of heritage resources, and the additional resource consent costs imposed by the provisions to protect heritage or cultural sites or buildings in the district plan. There is no similar policy in the proposed new plan. We have been advised that the reason that this policy, B3310, has been deleted is because of a decision to reduce non-regulatory content from the plan. We note that the author of the Section 42A report from the Council has recommended a policy in the proposed district plan to assist landowners to maintain and preserve heritage items, including through the provision of funding. We submit in support of the author of the Section 42A report that this policy be reinstated. Heritage funding. We understand from inquiries to council staff that a strategy is being developed to more broadly support heritage in the Selwyn district. We would support that so that the council would be able to assist in costs that would be over and above the normal costs if the church wasn't listed, as noted above. Waiving of consent fees. We would request evidence of a process where the waiving of consent fees would be considered. These would be consent fees generated because of rules imposed by the heritage listing. Our next point is in relation to the setting. We object to the very large area that has been defined for the heritage setting around the church building. A large portion of the setting is part of a current cemetery. After the preparation of the heritage item report form in 2018, the cemetery on the extreme left of the proposed setting has been expanded to the south. The cemetery is governed by its own set of legislation and should be excluded from the heritage setting. Other parts of the site have been developed in recent times without the need to obtain a resource consent due to a heritage listing. The site contains a new parish centre building, which was built in the late 1990s, and this is included in the heritage setting proposed. If that were to be built now with the heritage setting in place, a resource consent would be required, adding to the costs when the works do not touch the church itself. The advice we have been given from our heritage expert is that the setting should be restricted to the church, its immediate surrounds, and the former site of the presbytery. The report prepared by Dr. McPherson justifies the extent of its setting by reference to the old convent, which is also proposed to be listed in the plan as H167, and the former convent school. Just on page 3. The report justifies the extent of its setting by reference to the old convent, which is also proposed to be listed as H167, and the former convent school next door to it on Cardale Street. The convent was sold to a private owner 20 years ago and plays no role in the parish. And the former school building has not been identified as having heritage value, and again plays no part in the parish. We would request consideration by the commissioners be given to the downsizing of the heritage setting. An additional point that I'd like to raise, which is not included in those papers that you have been provided, is engagement with the owner regarding the heritage item record. We are disappointed about the lack of engagement with the owners during the preparation of the historic heritage item form. It is our understanding that in other local authorities, a heritage consultant contacts the owner, obtains useful background information that only an owner can have to inform decision-making, explains the process and seeks input into the record that is completed so that it is a better document. One example is that the heritage item report notes that St. Joseph's is part of the Catholic parish of Hornby-Darfield. From May 2020, St. Joseph's became part of the new Selwyn parish. There may not be agreement as to listing in these discussions with the heritage person or heritage expert, but at least there is an opportunity for understanding of the history of the building and the process. We are not aware of this taking place either at the diocese or at parish level. The response to our submission. On the 10th of December 2020, the building owner, the bishop, made a submission objecting to the heritage listing, which includes the setting of St. Joseph's Catholic Church, Darfield, in consultation with the parish. As per the care and attention that has been lavished on the church, it is recognised as being special. However, the concern is the additional restrictions and costs that would result because of the heritage listing. Over 9 months later, 13th of September 2021, we received by email a link to the notice regarding this hearing and including the Section 42A Historic Heritage and Notable Trees report. On examination of the report, we found that our submission had been rejected. We are disappointed that contact was not made by the report writer to discuss the objection and the reasons why we were concerned, or to advise us of the recommendation. We are aware that other councils meet with parties who lodge submissions in relation to heritage buildings to better understand the information that the owner holds. In Christchurch, the hearing panels requires these meetings to be held. and listings were amended and settings changed after a free and frank exchange of information held by the owner. Here, we were informed last week that there was a deliberate decision by the Selwyn District Council not to engage with any submitters on the heritage chapter who were opposing listings. We have been advised that this decision was an internal staff decision made on the basis of limited time and resources to be able to offer this service to all submitters. We were advised that the officer who has prepared the recommendation would not meet with us, and we had only had the opportunity of coming to the panel today. In the case of heritage buildings, we understand that there were only 5 submitters opposing listings. However, over a period of 9 months, we would suggest there was opportunity to communicate with the 5 out of 60 owners who opposed the heritage scheduling of their property. This would have enabled a better quality of information to come before the panel. In our case, it may have resulted in a change to the listing, changes to the rules around alterations, or a reduction in the setting. All outcomes that should have been discussed and cannot perhaps occur until any appeal stage is reached, when a court will direct mediation. Our final point is in relation to hearing timeframe. Given the length of time to receive the Section 42A report over 9 months, the time available to prepare the submission was extremely short, less than 1 month. This is especially problematical when dealing with the volunteer committees that oversee the care of St. Joseph's and during a time of COVID alert level 2 in our area. We appreciate that the timeframes provided are as per statutory requirements. However, in these circumstances, an extension of these could have been considered. Like the issue advised by the Selwyn District Council regarding limited time and resources regarding communicating with affected owners, the parish and diocese also suffer from the lack of these resources. So in conclusion, thank you very much for the opportunity to submit to the hearing today. The parish of Selwyn, and especially the people of Darfield community, have a great love for St. Joseph's Catholic Church. Their actions since its construction in 1937 demonstrate this. Our concern is the additional costs that will result because of the listing, with these costs having to be met by donations and fundraising. As outlined above, we would like an assurance that the council is prepared to assist in any costs that would be over and above the normal costs incurred if the church wasn't listed. We would also request that the heritage setting be reduced so that it only covers the church and the immediate surrounding area and the former site of the presbytery. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And did either of your colleagues want to add anything to that, or are you happy to opportunity to do so?
I'm Father Brian Fennessy, the parish priest. I'm more than happy to just leave it with the presentation that's been made by Terry Foote. We've been in dialogue and we've discussed it. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'd just like to say, in support of everything that the submission makes, we cannot stress strongly enough how ham-fisted this whole process has been. It would seem to me that the best way to protect heritage buildings in New Zealand is for councils and building owners to be able to work in a collaborative environment. We've seen none of that in this case. We've found out almost by accident, for example, that our objection had been rejected, and at no time have we been reached out to by the Selwyn District Council to for us to get clarity about what this might mean. We were able to have a pre-hearing meeting with planners last week in answer to a question posed about what were the advantages of listening to the St. Joseph's Parish community. The answer was that there is no advantage at all, but there is a perceived advantage to the community. I would therefore venture to say that the community has been receiving the advantage of having that building in its presence for the last 84 years and cared for by those same members of the community who attend that church. Thank you.
Thank you. Very succinct and well put. First of all, I'll just start with a question. Mr. Foote, thank you for preparing that presentation. We take your point about lack of resources and lack of time, but I must commend you on a very well put together written presentation. So thank you for doing that. It certainly answered some questions I had of you. But first of all, in terms of the lack of consultation that you're saying has occurred or hasn't occurred, and the limitations on time to prepare a submission, I'm interested to know whether you're confident that you understand the rules in the plan as they relate to any work that you're intending. I mean, they are quite complex, and we're still struggling to understand them, to be honest. So I just wanted to ask whether you feel you're confident in assessing the impact this listing would have on your data or your operations for maintenance and potentially replacing a roof, as you mentioned. Are you confident about that?
We understand that repairs and maintenance or minor repairs and maintenance won't require the gaining a resource consent. We did discuss with the council officers works involving the roof. That's one of the main concerns, and it was suggested that that would come under HHR3 additions and alterations.
Right, and just I was curious about the estimate you had for a resource consent to be prepared for replacing the roof in the order of $50,000 to $100,000. Are you aware whether that assumed that it would be a notified process? In other words, it would go through a public submission process? Is that
was advised to us by our solicitor, and
yes,
I presume it would have been through a notified process.
Right,
Yes.
because one of a group of submitters have asked that we consider what's called non-notification clauses, which are clauses that are inserted into the plan to make it clear in certain situations, then there's no compulsion to publicly notify or get written approvals from neighbours. And are you aware of that clause?
I wasn't aware of that.
You're not aware of that,
but
okay.
I can see the benefit of it.
Yeah, that's something we'll be considering in due course. But look, that's all the questions I had for now. I'll just put it over to the panel.
Kia ora and thank you. As with the previous speaker, your submission today has helped tremendously. Kia ora and thank you.
Kia ora.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one, and it sort of follows on from the Chairman's question. I'm interested in your comment and request around the setting to be reduced. And it was, again, following on from what the Chairman said, because I'm just looking at activities that can occur within a setting, the rules. And it specifically references earthworks associated with interments and installation, maintenance, or repair of monuments associated with interments within a setting and land disturbance. And I just wanted to make sure that you're aware of that, and being aware of that, do you still have concerns about the extent of the setting, given that it would appear to allow you to do what you want to do in terms of the cemetery?
Sure. The advice we've received from the heritage expert is that the setting should be reduced. The parish has plans in the future for areas around that very large setting that has been put in place. And we're very concerned that those future plans may be impacted by the size of the setting that has been suggested in this record.
Okay, so well, thank you for clarifying that. So it's not so much the works to this cemetery; it's actually other plans that you've got in mind.
Sure, and the cemetery has been extremely well looked after, and we're very lucky to have a dedicated group of people at Darfield who maintain it. And as I say, it's been extended to the south, and that was opened by a bishop father in November last year. And that the new area of the cemetery, or the extension, because the original cemetery is fully occupied, has gone across into the area which is not covered under this. And as we say, it's all covered under legislation which we comply with in regard to cemetery maintenance and care.
Yeah, and those activities will be permitted. So it's not interment issues; it's something else that you're looking at doing then.
Sure.
In that extension, is that what you're telling me or telling us?
Can I help? One of the plans that we have is that there is an area there that we would like at some future date to set up to be a place where ashes can be deposited. And so we've started to do some work on what sort of, shall we say, architectural features of that we might want to develop in that area. Because obviously with the way the cost of burials is tracking these days, more people are considering cremation as a better option than burial. So we want to be able to meet that need in our community. And when we make a decision about how that area is going to be set up, we don't then want to have to incur a whole lot of costs with consultants and getting consents, etc., to be able to go ahead and do the work. We've already proven that we know how to look after heritage buildings. We don't need a listing to make sure that we can continue to look after and treat with sensitivity and respect the facilities we have, or the facilities that we might put on site.
Right, thank you for clarifying that. Appreciate it. No further questions.
Okay, so thank you, gentlemen, for coming along. We do appreciate that, and we will seriously consider the points you've made. We would like to do a site visit this afternoon too. So is that okay if we come out to the site?
Yep, we can help with that.
Just wander
What
around.
time?
And, yes, it'll be sometime mid-afternoon. We've got a few sites to visit, but
shall we? Well, I actually live out there, so
yeah.
I'm happy to show you around.
Well, we're probably best just to make our own way around, I think. And I should also point out, we won't have the reporting officers with us. We'll have an independent officer, so that, to put it bluntly, no one can chew our ear on it. So we'll have a look around, and you've given us enough information with the site plan and the aerial photographs. So if there is someone there, we'll make ourselves known, but otherwise we'll just walk around the site. So thank you very much.
Thank
Okay,
you.
appreciate
Thank you all for hearing.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rennie. I think you've been waiting patiently there. You're welcome to come forward when you have the opportunity. Thank you. Yes, thanks for coming along, Mr. Rennie, and we're in your hands as to how you wish to present. But we have read the staff report as it relates to your submission, but other than that, please feel free to present.
You've done more than I have then. I have sent in advance an exhibit that may or may not have been circulated. I sent it last week when I got confused about my delivery time. My presentation, but I have hard copies here of it a few.
Mail sent to us, but I neglected to print that out. So if you do have extra copies, that would be great. Thank you.
Hold on to one. Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you today. And I don't envy your trip around the sites this afternoon. I suspect there'll be a windshield tour. I've submitted in partial support of the historic and heritage provisions of the district plan. And my support is basically, I haven't looked at all of the provisions or all of the different sites. I've just, it's a general support for the idea of listing heritage sites generally. We don't own a listed site down here in Selwyn, but we do have one house that's in the heritage zone in Waipa. And so I can empathise with landowners who have to get resource consents and have to pay the extra cost of doing maintenance and so on. And if there's ways of reducing those costs, I would urge that you look at that, especially for maintenance of existing character. Changes that might alter the character, then I think those should fall on the actual applicant. I did draw to the council's attention when they were doing the initial plan drafting, preparation and review stages, a couple of sites that I thought should be included in a heritage sort of area. Two of those sites have been included and I'm pleased to see them there. The Irwell School Hall and the St Mary's Anglican Church. I just want to note that there is an error, I think, in the plan that H403, the former Irwell School, Irwell Hall, 894 Leaston Road, Leaston. I'm sure that Leaston should be Irwell, especially as it's diagonally across the road from the Irwell School Hall. So it's just a minor typo there. I don't just want to draw that to your attention, seeing as I missed it the first time I went through looking for Irwell sites. The background to this is that my family has been living in the Irwell area for over 150 years. My ancestors used to ride by horseback to the Irwell Hall to go to school there. I went to Sunday school at the Irwell Hall, the church there, the St Mary's Anglican Church. My mother used to play the organ there for a long time, and that's our church, that's our community. My family are Coes and Rennies from down there, and the just had a really long association with those places. We know how how important they are to the community. The Irwell Hall is now in private ownership, but the current owner is maintaining its character and its external appearance, and a large amount of its internal. And I think in a lot of these cases, the current guardians of these places have formed good stewardship roles, which should be recognised. And in most of these cases, I don't think in plan making we are concerned about necessarily the current owners, but the future owners when it changes hands or future circumstances arise that cause the current owners to have to make hard choices. And in a sense, when we're looking to protect heritage, we're trying to put a bit more weight in the wider importance of those heritage sites than the mere commercial or other significant values of them. So I'm fully supportive of both those sites being included in the settings, being included in the list of heritage sites. What I would like to see added, and it's somewhat difficult to figure out how to add this, so I can appreciate this, is to more or less to create a heritage area that includes the Sudley Park across the road. Now, Sudley Park is not a historic building. The building was built in 1962, I think it was opened. The sports clubs that use the area, cricket was flourishing back in the 1860s, actually, on my great-great-grandfather's paddocks at Bruceco Lodge, but ultimately the community sports, rugby and so on have all moved to here at some stage. If you go into the Sudley Park building, you'll find the walls are lined with photos dating well back into the turn of the century of various sports teams and so on. It's almost a museum in there when you go in there. So although the park and its building are not, I would say in any sense, historic in terms of their physical structures or the length of time they've been there, they are culturally and socially historic. They help to perform a link for people in the community with that heritage. And I think that is something that's difficult to put in normal heritage planning contexts. The thing that really strikes me, though, is that if you think of a rural community in New Zealand, certainly a predominantly Pākehā rural community, the church, the school, and the recreation form the core of those small rural communities. And I can't think of any place I've seen in New Zealand, and I may just not have looked with my eyes open, but certainly a place where you get the three of them in such close proximity, in such a legible way of seeing the history of a community. And it's for that reason I feel that this is something that should be recognised and given some form of protection. And I've suggested a heritage area. There are historic buildings there, although not over all three of the sites, but heritage area doesn't require you to have historic buildings on every part of the site, so as I understand it. So I thought you could call this a historic area and simply adapt some of the rules to protect it from inappropriate subdivision and development generally. Just put a bit more weight on that and a recognition of the location. So those are the base of the submission. It's I know it's a fairly minor one in the context of some ones you've been considering, but I think this has such legibility that warrants consideration.
Mr. Rennie, just two questions for me. Were there any submissions, further submissions relating to your submission? Anyone opposing what you're seeking?
I didn't see
You
any.
didn't see any? Okay, we
No,
can
I
have that.
did have a
clarified.
look and I didn't see any. I may just have, I looked very quickly at the.
All right.
It's been a very difficult time lately.
Oh, no, we'll have that checked. And the park, the Sudeley Park, looks like it's got a rural zoning. So do you feel that there's any threat of development? Do you think the rural zoning itself might provide some sort of protection?
I'd like to think that, but look, the house at the end of the road, we're selling a subdivision at the end of our road that we didn't think could be there because of cluster housing, future potential for subdivision. I could see the Gammock estate outside Springston, which is for a long time has been almost the guaranteed green belt between Christchurch and Springston. They've just changed the trust deed to enable them to sell that and turn it into, if through reverse sensitivity, they can no longer farm there, they can shift elsewhere and turn that into it. So, you know, how with the push for affordable housing and so on, who knows what someone might suddenly decide to do there.
I presume it's owned by the council at the moment, do you think?
I'm not entirely certain. I've tried to find that out. I didn't have access to the right records.
Right. Anyway, look, that's fine. We'll have those things looked into. So thank you very much.
No.
No, thank you.
Very clear and precise and concise submission. Thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. All right. There's no further submitters until Thursday morning, I believe. We've got one more on Thursday morning. So we'll adjourn at the moment and do some site visits this afternoon. So thank you very much. And we'll potentially go past this group of sites as well. Thank you.
Thank you.